Our series is entitled Fences, and today's message is entitled Drop It. Drop it. We'll get around to what that means here in a few moments, but I want to start off with this idea, and that's this, that offense is an event, but offended is a decision. Offense is an event, but offended is a decision. Let me illustrate with something that is less than 24 hours old out of my own experience at home last night at our house. So we're in the process of undecorating from Christmas, right? And my wife just loves to decorate, so she's really got her heart in it, and she goes all out. So it's a big process for us to, get it all back in the boxes and stored away. Takes parts of about 3 different days, and yesterday was one of those days. And we were having a great time, just working together as a team, having fun, visiting about this and that, and, making a lot of progress. And we were at a stopping point, and I flipped on the fireplace, and I noticed that she'd left some of the decorations from her mantle arrangement on the hearth, and I didn't want them to get too hot or melt, so I was removing them, being very considerate of my wife's precious decorations. That was where I was coming from in my own intentionality. But as I picked up a couple of things to go set them safely on the couch, I knocked off something else from the hearth, rolled onto the floor, and broke into several pieces. And it was precious to her. About 20 years old. Already broken a little bit on the backside, the centerpiece of her annual decoration on the mantle. Literally the centerpiece of this decoration. Something that, even though it was broken a little bit on the backside, she'd tried to find a replacement for and was unsuccessful because they just don't make exactly this. And I found out it's not just a decorative bulb, a $2 or $3 item at Hobby Lobby. No, this is an oil lamp. And here it was shattered on the floor. And as soon as I saw it go into pieces, my wife heard it. She was about 20 feet away in the kitchen. And I knew it was coming. I knew I was in the doghouse, and I knew it was coming. You didn't. You did not break that. Tell me you didn't break. Yeah, I broke that. You have no idea how disappointed I am. And she just was very honest. Her feelings were right out there. And I didn't even need her to say anything because I had heard her in years past talk about this particular item. And I'm thinking to myself, Craig, you idiot, of all the things to break, that's the one you didn't want to break. Anything else been a lesser offense. But that, Craig, what were you thinking? Didn't you see it there? And she just, I knew I had offended her horribly. And I felt bad about it, right? So I apologized. And she just is like still in her, processing her emotions, and she's just going off, right? And by the way, if you're wondering, I asked her if it was okay to tell this story. She said, yes, it's okay, provided you make me look good and you look bad. So wait for it, it's coming, right? So I thought, well, I've got to fix this, because that's what us guys do. We fix things, right? So I'm thinking, I got to fix this. And to me, fixing had less to do with her feelings and more to do with replacing this thing. So I went and got my tape measure, measured. It's about 5 inches. Like, I'll bet I can find one on the internet. And I spent the next 30 minutes trying to find something. I went all over all kinds of websites I didn't even know existed, and I could not find something. She says, I told you, it's irreplaceable. It's just, you won't be able to find. I've looked, and it's just not. And it's like, and I just felt worse and worse. And after about 30 minutes of me searching the internet, she finally said, just stop that. And I said, but I feel bad. She says, I know you do. She says, but I'm over it. Now, I know my wife well enough to know that as honest as she was about her feelings and how disappointed she was in me and how offended she was that I broke something that was that precious, I also knew she was honest and sincere when she said, I'm over it. She had dropped it, right? And so I was glad for that. And by the way, while I'm at it, just in the interest of making her look good, I want you to know that we have a fantastic relationship. It's a wonderful relationship. Over 40 years married now. And I attribute 93.5% of the credit of why we have a great relationship to her. Now, I'm responsible for 6.5%. And there are times when I'm really proud of my contribution to our relationship. But for the most part, we have a great relationship because of her and her ability to do what she did last night, even when she's offended, and justifiably so. I really messed up. She was able, within a matter of about a half an hour, to come to a place where she could truly drop it. Now, in the process of me searching the internet and listening to her process her feelings out loud, I found myself getting offended because I'm thinking to myself all along, it's a dumb little glass thing. And it was broken already on the backside. Is it that big of a loss if it broke all the way? I mean, come on, it started a couple years ago and we're just finishing what got started that other Christmas, right? It's like, what's the big deal? And I'm getting offended inside, and then I realize, that's not helping anything. That's not good. Craig, you know what you're talking about tomorrow, and you're going down the wrong track here. So I decided to drop it. Now, we all know what that's like. You get offended, then the other person gets offended that you're offended. You know how it works, right? I mean, you're working really hard on that project at work, and it goes to the boss, and the boss is really impressed with it and gives all the credit to your coworker, and you're thinking, what? What, am I invisible here? I contributed at least 60 or 70% to that project. It's successful because of me. Why don't I get any credit? And you're offended. Or the neighbor comes over and knocks on the door, very polite and calm, but you can tell there's an inner turmoil behind their words, and they're talking to you about the tree branches that hang over into their yard. And they want you to do something about it because it's your tree and it's hanging over in their yard. They're offended because you didn't cut your tree, and you're offended because they came over and talked to you about it, and now both of you are offended. It just happens so easily in our culture. I mean, think about the world we live in and the culture that we're in right now. Have you paid attention this last year with the whole campaign and all the political and social issues that were brought to the fore in the context of the campaigns that went on? I mean, we are so politically correct in this culture that people get offended left and right. There are some people that are offended about everything all the time. It's like nothing you can say or do is not going to offend them. I'm interested, the few times I get on social media, I'm interested in all the outrage over things, that people just, stuff that's not intended at all. I mean, how many times has that happened? Somebody got offended at you, and you realize later that it was harmless and innocent, and it wasn't at all what they perceived it to be. You know what I'm talking about? You're going through a hard time, and your friend doesn't call you. And you're offended. And every day that goes by, you're just getting worse and worse in this inner turmoil that you're working yourself up into. It's like, I'm offended. I thought they were a better friend than that. Why don't they care? Where are they? I mean, why haven't they picked up the phone? Why didn't they come by? Do they not care about me? I mean, I thought they cared about me more. And you get yourself all worked up only to discover later they're actually going through a harder time than you are, thinking the same thing about you. And you're both offended. See, it's not possible to avoid offense in our culture, especially now, more than ever. Offense is an event, but offended is a decision. Do you catch these two words, offense and offended? See, Jesus said it's inevitable that offenses will come. There's no avoiding it. You can't live in this world without getting offended, occasionally at least. But the choice to be offended is up to you. In the early years of my relationship with my wife, I offended her many times and was offended in return many times. I look back on it now and realize that a large part of the reason that I was unhappy during those years, and Cindy was unhappy, not that we were, not in love with each other, but there were a lot of low times. There were a lot of seasons in those first few years of our relationship where it wasn't just this wonderful, happily ever after experience. And part of it was, there are lots of reasons for that, but most of it had to do with me growing up and maturing because we were married pretty young. And a lot of it had to do with this very dynamic. In our fumbling around trying to figure out how to be a husband and a wife, we would step on each other's toes all the time, and we would create an event. And it was, inevitable as we were working out how to make this thing called marriage work for us. But early on, didn't make the choice not to be offended. Instead, we were offended. And we found that our being offended just robbed our relationship of all the joy and the satisfaction, the warm, fuzzy feelings, and all that kind of stuff that was there some of the time, but not very much of the time sometimes. And so I discovered this verse in Luke chapter 7, verse 23. Jesus is speaking. He said, "Blessed is he who does not take offense at me." Blessed is he. Blessed, the word blessed here, in fact, in some translations, is translated happy or joyful. Blessed means like you would use it. Hey, I'm really blessed. It's a good thing. It's a joyful or a happy prospect. Jesus is saying, happy is the one who does not take offense at me. For many people, Jesus is offensive, and they stumble at the thought of him and how that all works, and he's referring to that in a much larger context. But what's true here is also true in our relationships with one another. We're happier when we don't take offense. And it's very clear here that Jesus is implying that there's a choice to be made. Blessed is he who chooses not to, or does choose, it's up to you, to take offense. In other words, let's put it another way. If you want it to be easier for you to be happy, make it harder for you to be offended. Let me read that again. If you want it to be easier for you to be happy, make it harder for you to be offended. Think about all the times that people have offended you and how that's affected your demeanor. Last night, when I did what I did and we had that 45-minute thing that we did, it just sucked all the joy out of the room. We'd been having a great afternoon together, and then all of a sudden there's this wet blanket over everything. Now, because we both made the choices that we made, choosing not to be offended, things were restored that evening, last night. But it was a choice, to be sure, that had to be made one way or the other by her and by me. If you want it to be easier for you to be happy, make it harder for you to be offended. This applies to your marriage. It applies to your friendships. It applies to your relationships with your parents or your kids or your neighbors or your coworkers or your boss. It applies to the relationships you have with people in this room and in this church. Now, we're talking about fences. So what does offenses have to do with offense? Well, we're going to get into what God's Word has to say and see the answer to that question. And before we get there, I just want to kind of set up the passage we're going to look at. It's in Matthew chapter 5. It's at the beginning of a long teaching that Jesus does called the Sermon on the Mount. And in this teaching, he's kind of launching his public ministry in a grand way. And he's challenging the conventional wisdom of the day that has been taught pretty consistently for generations by the religious leaders of the day. And so in this passage, we pick it up in chapter 5, verse 21, he's going to say, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago." In other words, our ancestors have kind of propagated this idea. And then he will go systematically through a bunch of those. We're going to just look at one of them right now. It was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." It's a direct quote from the Ten Commandments, true and accurate. You shall not murder, and if you murder, that's bad. And Jesus is not disagreeing with that, but what he's going to do is add a depth to it that was being forgotten. You see, in their emphasis on outward behavior, the religious leaders of the time, and sometimes far too often it happens in today's world as well, religious leaders will focus on external behavior. If you perform accordingly, if you fit in the box I've designed for you, if you behave like I expect you to, then you'll get approval from me and by approval from God and by the group as well, whatever the group happens to be. And so this emphasis on external behavior, and Jesus is going to flip the script. He's going to say, no, that's not the way to look at it. He says he's going to make this point in a variety of ways, that before anything ever happens outwardly in our behavior, in our relationships, in our actions, in our words, something's been happening for a long time in our heart. It's been happening in here. He says, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." Right, but I tell you there's more to it than that. In other words, but I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, and then there's this funny word, raka. Everybody just say, raka. Now say it like you mean it, raka. It's weird, right? It's a weird word. Little research told me that word basically in the culture of the day is like an expletive. It's a curse word, right? You know, it's the thing. Yeah, your pastor just cursed. That's right. Apparently in Aramaic. Anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, I can relate to that a little more, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, let's just stop there. The fire of hell is a little bit of an interesting phrase, and it might mean something a little different than what you're thinking. See, the word here in the Greek is the word Gehenna, and it actually refers to a valley, a literal geographic location in Israel, that way, way, way back was the place where idolatrous people, not the Israelites, but other tribes, used to offer children. They'd throw them into a fire in this valley as part of religious worship of a false god by the name of Molech, a pagan god. And it was an atrocious, tragic thing. And then later on in the time of Christ, that same valley was actually used as a place to dump all their garbage. So it was like the transfer station of the people, right? It's like the incinerator out on the West Plains. And literally they would set fire to the refuse. It's just how they managed all their garbage. And it would get hauled out there and it just left to smolder and burn. So the fires never went out. So when Jesus is saying, anybody who says Raka or you fool will be in danger of the fire of Gehenna, it meant something to them in their culture that it doesn't mean to us today necessarily. And what he's saying to them is this is about what's going on in your heart. And if you allow anger in your heart, and if you allow this Raka dynamic to go unchecked and unaddressed in your heart, you're going to create turmoil that's like the fires of hell. It's like the fires of Gehenna, the valley, and that turmoil is not ever going to end. So deal with that first. See, I'm always amazed. People will say, yeah, well, it just seemed out of the blue that they were so happy together, and now they're filing for divorce. And how'd that happen? It wasn't out of the blue. There were things in the heart that went unaddressed and undetected and dealt with, and they were unresolved in their hearts. There was anger and resentment and grudges and things going on there. And Jesus is saying it's not just about the outward thing. Once somebody's been punched in the face, something's been simmering in the heart for a long time. Once somebody pulls out a gun and does unspeakable things to take the lives of others and do them harm, there's been something going on in the heart for a very long time. And Jesus is trying to get them to focus on their hearts. Therefore, he says, because this is true, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, in other words, you've come to worship me, this is what God's saying to us, leave your gift there in front of the altar first, go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. In other words, God's saying, listen, I want you to worship me, but listen, if you've come to worship me and there's this unresolved thing in your heart towards somebody else, you've offended them or they've offended you, and you know that that's the case, it's so important to me that you deal with that I would rather you stop worshiping and go take care of that and then come back and do this. That's how important to God it is that we choose not to be offended, and that when we are offended, that we choose not to make it an enduring thing, but resolve it in our hearts as well. And he says, don't just think about it, deal with it expediently, efficiently. He says, settle your matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court while you're still together on the way. In other words, don't wait till it comes to court. Don't wait until it's a showdown. Don't wait until you're sitting in front of the divorce attorney or you're looking for another job because you just can't possibly be in the same office with that person. Don't wait till it gets to that point. As it's starting to unfold, stop and deal with it. Settle your matters quickly with that person that you have a grudge against or they have a grudge against you. Or if you don't, bad things will happen. Next verse. Or your adversary may hand you to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. In other words, it's just going to go from bad to worse if you don't deal with it early and quickly and efficiently. And when you choose not to, when you choose to be offended, here's what happens. When you choose to be offended, you build a fence. You build a fence. You start putting up barriers in the relationship. And at first, maybe one doesn't seem like a lot, and then another, and pretty soon you wonder how the relationship got where it has gotten, and it's gotten there one offense at a time because you, when you were experiencing offense, chose not to drop it, But to be offended, to nurse that thing and rehearse that thing and let that thing grow and get into your heart and make you agitated and you think about it, and every time you think about it, you get all worked up over it, and it keeps you awake at night, and it affects your attitude at work, and people wonder why you're so grumpy, but you've got this thing going on inside, right? You started to build a fence. Offenses result in fences if we don't choose not to be offended. And the closer the relationship, close friendship, husband, wife, parents with the kids, whatever closer the relationship, the greater the opportunity for intimacy, right? Like marriage is the ultimate example of that, and I don't just mean physical intimacy. I'm talking about relational and emotional intimacy, shared dreams and visions, teamwork, collaboration, friendship, all the stuff that goes along with a great close relationship. But if this is true, it's also true that the closer the relationship, the greater the opportunity for offense. Because who hurts you worse? Whose offense affects you the most? It's the person closest to you, right? Like if I'm in the store and the clerk says, man, you're having a bad hair day today. It's like, I don't care. It's like I'm thinking, yeah, I wonder how long you're going to have your job saying stuff like that. But I don't really care. Just give me my change. I'll be on my way. I'll pick a different store or a different clerk next time. I don't have a relationship with you, and apparently I don't want one. Right? But if I get in the car on a Sunday morning after doing this, and my wife says to me, you're apparently having a bad hair day, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Where was that helpful input before I got up on stage the first time? It doesn't do me any good now. And then I'm getting offended at her. And then I have a reaction, and she says, hey, I'm just trying to help you. And she gets offended. And then the thing just takes a nosedive. And by the time we get home, it doesn't feel like we've been at church at all. And I'm the pastor. Because you choose to be offended. When you choose to be offended, you build a fence. And a lot of times, the building of the fence has to do with unmet expectations. Unmet expectations. I had a friendship that lasted almost 3 decades. At times, a long-distance relationship, and one of those rare ones you have. Very good friend, and things started to go sideways, and pretty soon there was no relationship at all. Little by little, we're taking little baby steps to try and restore that. I did just a few months ago, and we'll see how it goes now. But there was a great relationship that went sideways completely, big time. And I found out that there were, both of us were at fault. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I found out unbeknownst to me that he had expectations of me I knew nothing about. And when they weren't met, he got offended. Turns out some of those expectations would have been realistic. Had I known about them, I could have made some adjustments like, hey, yeah, that's cool. I'm good with that. But some of the expectations were unrealistic. But the point is, I didn't know anything about them. Unmet expectations are the breeding ground of offenses. You expect the boss to be more enthusiastic about your work. You expect your kids to be appreciative of the roof over their head and the clothes on their back. And then you remember, oh, they're kids. Right? Unmet expectations are the breeding ground of offenses. And some of you may be thinking, yeah, and I've got some unmet expectations. And you're starting to list them in your head. Hold on, wait a minute, time out, because unexpressed expectations are the breeding ground of unmet expectations. See, it's not fair to have an unmet expectation that you never expressed. I don't know how many times I've told my wife over the years, I am not a mind reader. If you're feeling it or thinking it, you've got to tell me. Now, you think some things would be obvious. Like, for example, our first Christmas. We had no money, and, I loved her, and I wanted to give to her something really special, something that she really needed, something that I know she wanted, and so I went to the store, and I bought it for her, and I was excited to give it to her on Christmas morning. It was a brand new ironing board. I know, I'm a little smarter now, not a lot, but a little smarter. Brand new ironing board. And her face told the whole story. Unmet expectations. Our first Christmas together, she's expecting something else. Anything else. Not an ironing board. Are you kidding me? But I didn't know. I did find out. Now, she was offended, and I didn't know it, but she loved me too much to really say much in the moment. Later on, I found out in front of friends, as she shared with them, oh, you won't believe what Craig gave me for Christmas. And I'm sitting there horrified. Now I'm offended because she's embarrassing me with her friends. She's offended, and it's just like, okay, we've got a decision to make here. We've got to choose not to be offended, or we're going to make offense between the two of us, right? Well, when you choose to be offended, you build a fence. And I think it'd be helpful if we just have a little fun and illustrate that a little bit so we can understand that. I'm looking for a volunteer couple. These dynamics, these principles apply to all our relationships, but let's use a married couple, a newlywed couple in the room. I don't know who we've got here, but if you've been married a year or less and you're willing to come up here not knowing what you're getting into, you can trust me, I'm a pastor. I give good gifts to my wife at Christmas. You can trust me. If you're willing to be a good sport about it, less than a year, anybody? How about less than 2 years? Anybody? Why are you ducking down back there? Less than 3 years? Do we have anybody married in this room? Oh, here we got some people that are being a good sport about it. Come on, give them a hand here. That's a big deal to come on up here. They have no idea what's in store for them. Now, this is great. I'd like you to do me a favor. Could you introduce yourselves here to the come on up here. Stand in the bright lights. Thank you so much for being good sports. Sure. You are?
I'm Tiffany.
I'm CJ.
Tiffany and CJ. And you've been married how long?
2 years and a couple months.
2 years and a couple of months. 2.5.
That's right. She's better at math.
Apparently.
Have you been married to each other for that same period of time? Because apparently he's been married longer than you have. Okay. Now they love each other. They're smart folks. You've got a great relationship, right? Or you wouldn't be up here, right? And so thank you for being willing to help me illustrate this. But even with the best of relationships, offenses come. So let's have you step over here, if you would, CJ. And Tiffany, you can be right there. And let's just say that this is a board that represents an ironing board, okay? And just pretend for a moment that you're me, and you decide to give an ironing board to Tiffany on your first Christmas. He didn't do that, did he? No, he's smarter than it. He knows better. Yeah, all right. But let's just say for discussion's sake, that's exactly what he does, and you right away are what? Offended, exactly. And now you've got the offense. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And what you do with it is you take it, go ahead and I'm just going to guide you here. Just go ahead and put it right, stand it right up, slide it right in there. Go ahead, you got it. Both hands. Drive that right down in there. Stand that up right where it goes. All right. And a couple days later, she tells you how offended she is about that ironing board, but she does it in front of friends, right? So you do what? You get offended, and yep, you get the idea. Exactly. And so now we got a couple of fence boards. Now, CJ, come over here with me here, and I'll hand you another one. Let's just say that represents a comment that you made when Tiffany, right? When Tiffany asked you, so how do I look in my new outfit? And you said,
You look great, honey.
You look great, honey. Okay? And you're thinking, that's not near enough gushing. Go ahead, offend her. That's not near enough enthusiasm. You look great, honey. I could have got that line off a sitcom, and now you're all offended because you were expecting kind of some head over heels. Oh, how fabulous is that? That's the best outfit I've ever seen. Hang on to that real tightly. Put that in there because you're getting even more offended now. And you're thinking, what's wrong with, you look great, honey, because you're thinking that's me being enthusiastic, and now you're getting offended that she's gotten offended. Go ahead. You know what to do. Oh, yeah, just put it in there. That's okay. They won't fall over.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel offended.
Are you getting offended? See, what happens is we get offended, and then we get offended that the other person's gotten offended, and that's what's happening. You're offended that he's offended. So pick up another board and just slide it right in there because, I want you to do it, and do it like you mean it because after all, come on. CJ, if he really loved you and cared about you, he'd be a little more enthusiastic with his compliments. Slide that right on over there. Yeah, that's exactly right. Right? And then, what? You cleaned up the kitchen?
How rude.
Is that rude?
Offended he cleaned the kitchen, yeah.
She's offended that he cleaned the kitchen. When I clean the kitchen, I'm thinking, I've done my wife a beautiful thing. But Tiffany, she's offended. Pick up another board and put it in there, Tiffany. Come on, you're offended. He cleaned up the kitchen. How dare you clean up the kitchen? You're going to be offended that she's offended. Absolutely. And here, Tiffany, now he's going to make an issue out of it.
Well, yeah.
And he stomps out of the house.
Now I'm really mad.
Now you really are mad.
Now he's not answering text messages.
Now he's not answering text messages. You have got the idea. I'm a little worried. You guys seem to be too familiar with it. But so there you are putting all these fence boards. And CJ, is that you right there standing in front, right here? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yep.
And that's you right there? And what's happened to the relationship? They were offended and they built a fence. And now what was wonderful, warm and fuzzy, this great loving thing has become this. CJ, are you out there? CJ, we used to talk all the time. What's happened? CJ, you said you loved me. It seems like we're not as close as we used to be. Nothing happened all of a sudden. It happened one offense at a time. We have free counseling services available for you immediately following. Now, actually, Tiffany, I need you to come over here because what I want you to do is I want you to take this offense and just hold on to that for a minute. And I want you to consider the possibility of making a different decision. A decision that is more like the decision that someone very important made. I'm talking about the Lord Jesus Christ, who had every reason to be offended by you and by me. Because all of our sin, everything we ever said or done that was wrong, everything that we ever felt, everything that we ever failed to do or say that was ever wrong, was an offense to him. And yet he said, I choose not to be offended. I choose not to be offended by you or in any way take to heart the offensive things you've said and done. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to die on the cross and pay the price for those offenses. And when he made the decision to do that, he dealt with the issue of offense once and for all. What he said was, I could be offended and build a fence, a permanent fence that you'll never get past, and that would be forever. But he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make a different decision. I'm going to take the offenses that have come your way, and I'm going to nail them to a cross. Now, I'll get back to you guys in a minute here. Don't go away on me because we need you. But here's what Jesus said in Colossians chapter 2. It says, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us. This is the Apostle Paul. Excuse me a second here, get this straight. He made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions. So this is Paul the Apostle, leader in the early church, writing to believers in Colossae. And he's referring to what Jesus did when he died on the cross. He made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us. This is a reference to a common thing in the culture when somebody was put in a jail cell. On the door, they would nail a list of the offenses. Adulterer, liar, thief, whatever it was, all listed there and it was nailed to the door. But it goes on in Colossians chapter 2, verse 14 to say this. And he has taken that out of the way, the list of offenses that you and I have committed, and he has nailed it to the cross. In other words, all those offenses forgiven. All those offenses paid for by the Lord Jesus Christ. In other words, he said, I'm not going to hold it against you and build a fence with it. I'm going to drop it. And I'm going to drop it once and for all. And it's done. It's done. And then he says to Tiffany, I did that for you. Can you do that for CJ?
Of course.
I mean, really seriously, he was not enthusiastic about your outfit. But you dropped it. And CJ, can you do that for her? She got offended that you cleaned the kitchen and like you were just trying to help out.
I did mess up.
Can you drop it? All right. And just one by one, the thing that they did, the thing that they said, it's like you make a choice, go ahead and drop it. Let's just grab another board there, another offense. Okay, and what are we going to do? Everybody say it together? All right. And one more time. Everybody together. Drop it. And one more time, CJ. Drop it and drop it. And the fence is gone. And CJ and Tiffany live happily ever after again. Hey, let's give them a big hand. Thank you guys for being good sports. He did that for us, and he invites not just Tiffany and CJ, but all the rest of us to do what he did. He showed us how it works. He says, I could be offended, but I choose not to. Instead, I'm going to lay my life down for you. That's why in another place, in Ephesians chapter 4, it says this, and we'll end with these two verses. Verse 31 says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. What's that a description of? Think about it. Bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, slander, malice. That's a description of someone's behavior and attitudes and emotions who is offended. They may not be showing it outwardly, but it's going on inwardly, and they're starting to build offense. And God's word says to you and to me, get rid of all those things. Take those fence boards out, drop it. Put them on the ground where they belong. Don't start the fence. If the fence is started, dismantle the fence. Don't let the fence get built. It's inevitable that offensive situations are going to arise, but what you choose to do about that is up to you. Choose not to build a fence. Instead, do this. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Fences. We build them, whether we know it or not, we build them when we choose to be offended. And I'm encouraging you, I'm challenging you to make the choice to be less offended. And when you find yourself being offended, to deal with it more quickly and more efficiently. And if you have to have a conversation with that person about it, because I get it. Some things, seriously, some things, it's just a matter of making the choice in the moment. My wife, I offended her last night. She made a choice within about 30 minutes, processed her feelings. It's like, all right, the world didn't stop turning. And she made a choice to drop it. But I also understand that some things you can't make a decision about that quickly. Because they involve, again, remember, the closer the relationship, the greater the opportunity for offense. So sometimes it involves more complex things, and there needs to be a conversation. And maybe a third person needs to be brought in, or maybe 4 people are involved, or you have to have a family meeting or meeting at work, or whatever the case. So have the conversation, but do so with a pre-decision that says, I'm going to have this conversation, I'm going to express my feelings, I'm going to let Craig know that ironing boards aren't great Christmas gifts. I'm going to let him know that when he is less than enthusiastic about my outfit, it's offensive to me. I'm going to let him know those things. But no matter how that conversation goes, I've made a decision ahead of time that at the end of the conversation, I'm going to drop it. Because it's not good for me, it's not good for the relationship, and the only part that I can control is whether I am or am not offended, and I'm going to choose not to be, if for no other reason, because Jesus chose not to be offended at me. Now, that conversation, you say, well, yeah, that's the hard part. We'll talk about that next week. That's week 2 in this series, so please come back. It's a message that's devoted to help you have a healthy conversation about offenses so you can get to that place where you can actually drop it. And then week 3, we'll talk about what you do afterwards as you move forward and try to build relationships that are offense resistant. Offense resistant. So you don't want to miss either of those weeks, but right now.